Dear students, I'm just recording this lecture to explain the assignment, which in fact is kind of a review of our course. If you look at the course objectives, you will find these themes. I think it's important that we discuss the whole objectives and the course within the context of the objectives, halfway mark, and then move forward. So if you look at the themes that I have asked you to cover, it's one, international correspondence with focus on the role of Western media. Secondly, the imbalance in flow of information. Thirdly, the colonial legacy and media hegemony. And also a discussion on working conditions of the local journalists when they work in international media. We start with the first theme. International correspondence started as information about political power in different countries in Europe, as well as financial information. As history tells us that money lenders used to get information about the financial capacity of individuals who were asking for money during different eras in medieval Europe, where they wanted to know whether if somebody fails to pay, they would have enough money or assets to be liquidated and the debt repaid. Espionage is also one major area where diplomacy and spying work together. And most of the embassies used to have this dual role of keeping a good image of their country, good relations, as well as seeking information. Hence, the importance of embassies and their contacts for international correspondence till date. When international correspondents reach a country for coverage from their hometown, home country, they remain in contact with their embassies. Not that they are spying right now through the embassies, but it's a tradition. That's how the discipline grows. That being said, the Western media is basically the source of international journalism or international correspondence. Like international journalism is a larger theme, but international correspondence is basically the journalistic work carried out by a group of professionals who gather news, fashion them, present them, take feedback, and reconsider, like part of the media system. As we know that modern journalism is an invention of the West, so they have the due right of having the initiative. Secondly, powerful news agencies established in the early 20th century became one source of information, global collection of information in our modern day world. So when we talk about national journalism or international correspondence, it's about control of global media system, financial power, and political power of different countries. Colonialism, for example, is one way of understanding how global power of a single country was extended over the whole of the world. Like Britain, for example, we are a post-colonial society which were ruled by the Britain and also kind of Anglophile. So we look at countries in the West who speak English. In Africa, they are Francophiles, where French they remained French colonies, there were Italians and others. In the wake of all that, international correspondence developed in two ways. One, through reporters coming to these parts of the world and creating an image of this part of the world. Through gathering information, definitely they had their own lens to look at these areas. And they reported about different countries, like one of them was ours, Undivided India then. And that has created our image in international media, because then and now the power resides with the Western media corporations. These are big and huge. So we see that the role of Western media in defining the world is very important. As we have discussed that many thinkers have contributed to the understanding of the way West looks at the East. And earlier it was considered to be disgruntled Asians or others who were unhappy with the colonial rule, talking nonsense about the West. But then came writers like Edward Said and others, and even Noam Chomsky, who discussed the power of global media systems and the interests it serves. Like, media systems or news organizations don't simply report, they create a narrative, which is a global narrative. And within that narrative, different countries, nations, parts of the world are defined certain images and roles. So as Edward Said says that for us, it's being exotic, angry, in conflict, because this is the part of us that is covered. It's about conflicts in the developing world, as it's euphemistically called, and also some special human interest elements like dances and festivals and colors and foods and all these. Like, Lahore is beautiful because it has beautiful cuisine. The people are very friendly. They give you food for free and stuff like that. Like, whether somebody innovates anything, whether there are thinkers in the city, whether how is political activity going, whether there is other political or social activity beyond conflict, we won't see that. We'll see either the exotic or the conflict-ridden. You take the example of Lahore, and then you go into Peshawar, and then you go about Cairo, and then you go about any part of the world, and you will see that. But New York, like for example, is the bustling business center with leading in almost everything. Paris, even if doing nothing, is the cultural capital of the world. London is just everything. Berlin is business and art, culture, all these things. And these things, if you look into the context, are happening regularly, like here and now. But for us, the definition comes from a background which is always given. If you look at international news and something bad happens in our parts of the world, suddenly a file is brought up and said, and we are told that this, and this has happened so many times before. So it's a continuation. Like, these are the kind of people who commit certain mistakes repeatedly. Like this, it's their habit. And then the argument goes that that's why the West is the West and the East is the East. It's the famous line from Rudyard Kipling that West is West and East, and East is East, and both will never meet. So that's pretty true. You should also keep in mind that Rudyard Kipling was a racist colonialist. He was a good thinker and poet, and also a journalist. So when we look at the Western media, we should not simply look at news. This is what I meant. we should look at the narrative that the Western media builds, and within which, what do we get? Like, it's not all bad. The global media system is not all bad. It gives you a lot of information. It gives you opportunities to interact. It gives you opportunities to go beyond borders. It gives you opportunities to understand what good is happening around the globe. But your representation is important. Like, these are the information and sources that we get, the positive ones, through our individual interaction, thanks to globalization, social media, digitalization, where you can just uh, get connected with any person in the world or any group and get knowledge and refashion your own person, and all these things that happen. But the global media structure, on the other hand, will just use you as part of this small group. Like, there are divisions that are being maintained. So the next thing is that why is the developing world, like countries like ours, so weak? Is it something inherent that we are not able to build a good media structure which could represent us? Well, ostensibly, yes. Like, if you look at the question from a Western perspective, you will have a feeling that since we do nothing, we are not represented. But that's not true. Imbalance in the flow of information is something that the UN has recognized. There was a recognition in the 50s, but in the 60s it was more obvious, and then the UN has made the decision. UNESCO has decided to investigate it, and there was a commission formed under Senator Sean McBride, which is known as the McBride Commission, and it looked into the reasons why there is an imbalance in the flow of information globally, and how does it affect different countries. So what he said was that the Commission's report came with problem identification and possible solution. Problem identification was that the INAs, the international news agencies, had a dominant control over information. It's far earlier than the internet. So the world gets news through these 5 big news agencies, and their priorities are different than individual priorities of different countries and regions, like the developing world or the third world, which it was meant at that time. So it's important that we develop regional news agencies. Some regional news agencies were developed, but they failed because they didn't have the capital, they didn't have the control over the narrative. It was kind of a small echo chamber where you were trying to convince yourself that you are good, but the voice was not going out. And this is one important aspect to understand, that even if you make a lot of noise in the developing world, there are certain themes where the world opinion might budge, but then there are certain very important political themes that won't change, that will remain the same. Now, with the advent of social media and the pressure it creates globally, maybe it happens in the future. But from the mainstream perspective, it's not happening yet. The colonial legacy also is not simply the West not liking us or we being stupid. Like, it's beyond that. Like, colonialism is a system of governance, if I might call it, not exploitation, governance, where certain countries colonize other countries and then control them by a set of rules. And these laws were different from the ones that they practiced in their home countries. Like, for England, they had their own laws with freedom and everything. For the colonies, these were different laws, and these were applicable all across the colonies. Within that context, some mindset was developed, like the education system in education policy in the 19th century, laws in the 19th century India, which are still affecting the way we look at ourselves and the way we educate ourselves and all these things. Within that colonial legacy, international correspondence also operated. And it's very important to understand that it doesn't happen by chance, but rather there is a structure in place which has a lens. And through that lens, we are looked down upon, if I may say. And so colonial legacy doesn't mean that it's something that happens on individual level. If a nice Western journalist comes in, he or she will behave differently. Yes, on a human aspect, yes, but the news gathering system, the perspectives and presentation will remain the same. Somehow, the colonial legacy has been now taken over by the Americans, and they use the same lens to define many countries in the developing world. Hegemony is a phenomenon that should be understood within the proper context. Like thinkers like Antonio Gramsci, Frantz Fanon contributed to it. I always say Frantz Fanon's prophetic words that slavery becomes impossible to get rid of when slaves start kissing their chains. So this is what happens, that through a continuous process of control and indoctrination under an alien regime that doesn't respect your cultural values, you start hating yourself and loving them. Like it has nothing to do with the eclectic process of learning good and leaving bad. That's a natural process, and everybody should do that. We should learn from the West or any part of the world, and we should keep good values that we have, and we should get rid of the ones that we don't like, that don't pass the test of time. But this doesn't happen. You even start hating the good things about you. So you just try to be the other, and that's dangerous. So hegemony plays a big role in accepting all the blame, like self-guilt that we go through, like statements like Pakistan would never get better because we are inherently wrong. That's hegemony speaking, because when we say that, we say it, why are we inherently bad? Because certain other people are inherently good, and these people live in the West. So on a human level, nobody is fully good or bad. Like, we are all humans. We are all works in progress. So we shouldn't look down upon us, because hegemony doesn't mean that you have a moment of self-doubt, but it rather means that you self-loathe that persists, and you don't want to contribute to anything unless it's accepted by somebody else, because you look at yourself from the lens of the other. Self-orientalism is one concept also, but it's different. But here it is hegemony at place. But both do have hegemony as a common factor. Now the last part is, which is very important, is to understand that if you are a journalist working in Pakistan for an international media organization, what should you expect? Why would you work for them? One, everybody would like to have a global footprint. Like, why not? Why shouldn't I be published across the globe, everywhere? Why should I simply be restricted to my own town, no matter how good my job is? It's human to go global, and especially in fields of journalism, international journalism is considered to be the top beat. But the problem is that if you are in the developing part of the world, there are problems. One, you will very rarely get credit for your work. The story will always be fashioned according to the lenses of the Western media organizations, the dominant media organizations. Now, if they want to portray you as a conflict state, you have to contribute to that conflict state narrative. If they want to portray you as exotic, you have to contribute into that exotic piece. So you can't pitch a story. Normally, you can't pitch a story from here. You might be asked to write an article, which is an opinion, but you are not the decision maker in a story, no matter how experienced, how senior you are in this country. Somebody from the West will decide what the story would be. It might be the editorial decision makers in that country, or or the individual journalists who might be senior or junior or whatever. So recognition comes really difficult, and also it's really difficult to get your own version out, because there is a select structure in place, and it will always be looked at from within that perspective. Why do we work for international organizations? Because they pay well. Besides recognition, which we seldom get, and especially even if you are a big journalist, if you look at stories from your city, so it will be a Western journalist who has a credit line. At the end, you are recognized as from Lahore or from Shah contributing, and only names are given, and that's it. So that's not credit. That's just simply source recognition. And also, you don't know how the story will go. But there is another problem, because we are living in a conflict zone, and most of the stories about us are conflict focused. So we are source of information. So when we give information, that information is used according to their own agendas. Now the problem with such usage is that at times it gets us into trouble. For example, powerful groups that might harm your safety, your family's safety, your life, your job, anything. So you try to explain, and I know it with good authority, with personal experience, that at times journalists contributing from conflict zones explain their position and tell this is the truth, and that's information that might harm us. But the Western journalists and media organizations don't really respect that, and many journalists in the Pakistan's tribal areas faced consequences to the level of death because the information they had given were partially presented, because you are simply a fixer. So you just get information. And also sometimes you are asked to collect information from places and people that is dangerous. And you know that. You try to explain, but you were told that you will be given your remuneration or salary only if you provide that information from that part of a region and from that particular person. That's not easy. Like, it's difficult. Even if you tell them that you can't do that, they'll say no, because your paycheck will be only given to you when you do that, and that is very dangerous. And it's not dangerous simply as a journalist, but it creates a lot of trauma, because you know that you are contributing to a global enterprise, but what you are contributing is not used within the proper context, and you know that you are helping global media organizations instill an image of your country or your society which you don't like, but still you are working because you need the job. So I think that's where imbalance and disrespect for local journalists is one of the biggest problems of international journalism. There has been no debate on it till date, and it's still an open question, rather an open pestering wound. And we have to really find a solution to that. That's very important. We haven't seen till date a debate on this, and I think that it's long overdue that Western media organizations accept the responsibility of giving representation, safety, and proper status to journalists who contribute from conflict zone or from any part of the world. And the last word, that developing countries should be represented in a process. Like, these are not small countries. Like, for example, Pakistan is the 5th biggest nation on earth. Like, this is the other 4 are China, India, Russia, the US. So is it possible to take these out of global media agenda? No, but Pakistan is. Like, it's simply represented as the conflict. Even India is represented from conflict perspective and the problems that it had. Like, we see that, and it's very important that countries and societies are represented in a process, not only wait for bad things to happen or something exotic to come out. Like that's very important. So that's enough for today, and we'll discuss other things later. Thank you.